Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Welcome to episode 138 of Sports Management Podcast. Did you know that 65% of you who listen to this podcast do not yet subscribe? That means that you are at risk of missing out new episodes, and with the lineup that I have for 2024, that is not something you want to miss. So hit that subscribe button on your podcast app, and together we will grow Sports Management Podcast. Thank you. Today's guest is Lauren Johnson. She's a mental performance coach, speaker, and soon-to-be author. She's training athletes, military personnel, and business professionals, as well as giving speaking engagement and is hosting workshops. In this episode, we spoke about Lauren losing her best friend to suicide, being forced to quit soccer due to 5 concussions, how a man in the Starbucks drive-thru changed her life, traits among elite performers, the power of opposite thinking, and much more. Lauren Johnson, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this.
Me too. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time now. So your mission is to help people improve their lives through the choices they make. So how do you do that?
Well, a lot of different ways. I think that every single person is so wildly different. And thank God for that, right? I think that we are all so unique. And it's actually what I'm writing about in my book right now. I'm currently working on a book. And it's all about adding yourself to the equation of mental performance. And so while I think that, the principles that we are taught in school and the lessons that we teach our clients are all great, I also think that the way that we are most effective with clients and making better choices is quite individual to them. And so it's adding them into the equation of mental performance. And that's going to look slightly different for each and every individual. But there are kind of 3 steps I take people through, and I call it my 3 C's. And it's clarity, choices, and then consistency. We have to know where we're going first. We have to establish some clarity on the things that we want, the things that we don't want, the things that we want to continue, the things that we want to stop doing, and then understand, okay, how do our choices need to shift to become a filter to those goals that we really want? And then the last one is, how do we sustain it? Kind of like a cycle, because then we can go back, because it evolves over time, right? And so what you want and the clarity and all that kind of evolves over time. So we go back to clarity and choices, and it kind of becomes this like never-ending cycle.
I love that, because consistency is something that I've been working on myself. So loving the other 2, clarity and choices. So I think those are awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think what I found honestly is, I used to believe that success was being the best. But what I've learned is that success is an evolving definition. It's not just about being the best. It's actually being the best at getting better. Because your best today is going to look different than your best tomorrow. And it's, like I said, evolving over time. So what you do today is your very, very best. As you continue to give the best version of you, the best version of you is going to evolve and change with it. And so I find that self-improvement 3C cycle is just that. It's a cycle. And we continue through it throughout our life as we begin to improve and evolve.
So you're a mental performance coach, and you work with professional athletes, military, and business professionals. So if we talk about athletes first, when we talked about goals being the best, that's something in professional sports, you want to be the best. But you said being the best changes because you improve and maybe you get bigger and bigger goals. So how are you working with professional athletes?
Well, it depends. There's kind of different ways that a professional athlete can work with me. 1 is one-on-one. 2 is in a group setting where I come in and work with the team. And sometimes I come in just to do a quick session. But what I find is that with whether you're a professional athlete, a business professional, military personnel, anything in between, we're all humans. And the psychology of performance is not much different between all 3 different domains. Now, what is different is the language we speak, and how it gets applied is different. So instead of talking to somebody, pitching, about to pitch in the World Series, we're talking pitcher language, we might be talking, military language, or we might be talking business language. And so language shifts, but the psychology of performance is actually quite consistent throughout different domains. And so I often say, while principles may not shift a lot, how they get applied, will to some degree based on the individual.
Interesting. So I want to dig a little bit deeper, of course, in what you do, and have found some very interesting things that you have said in your content and everything. But just to get to where it all started. So how did you get into this path to work as a mental performance coach?
Honestly, because I was the one that needed it. I was I don't know, I like to say just average soccer player. I liked it a lot. I cared a lot. I was very average talent wise, but I worked really hard. I'd be hard pressed to find someone that would work harder than me. And it got me to a decent level. However, I wasn't going to be on the national team anytime soon. None of that. But I did have some offers overseas. And so I really took it seriously. And it was actually it was after I got injured and couldn't play anymore. It was my senior year, third game into my senior year, received my 5th concussion, and that was it for me. And it was really hard, but at the same time, it gave me a whole new perspective. And isn't that funny that oftentimes the toughest things that we go through, after we've gone through them, we look back and we can see the lesson that we needed to learn. And there was a lesson in there that I really needed to learn, which was actually that when I pour into others, I feel most alive. And so even being on the sidelines and having to set up cones and be the water girl every now and again and be just a shoulder to cry on or someone to listen, that filled me up more than playing on the soccer field did. And playing on the soccer field filled me up a lot. And so I kind of tuned into this, and I ended up taking a course in sports psychology. I didn't even know anything about it before taking this course. And I had this moment where I went, oh my gosh, who would I have been? What kind of player would I have been if I would have known these things? And then I thought, how many people can I help now that I do? And that's what actually began my curiosity to continue down this path. And I got my master's degree in performance psychology, and that's how I really got started into the field itself.
You have worked as a mental performance coach also at the California State University and also with the New York Yankees. How did you go from after you're getting your degree, and how do you get your first job there?
Oh, great question. Not like most. I'll start there. So I'll take you back to when I graduated. So I graduated with my master's degree, and I had this dream of working in pro sports, but those jobs weren't that easy to come across, especially right out of grad school. It wasn't a thing. So there were 2 different jobs that I got that one was more so in youth sports, and then another was in the military sector. And I was so excited, man. I was on cloud 9. And because here I am, right, fresh out of grad school, and I had options. So I looked at them and I realized, okay, I'm going to go one direction, and I decided not to go the other. The only catch was that the one I chose was going to take about 6 months for me to get placed, which was very normal for this position. So I took that one. 6 months goes by. I don't hear anything. And so I started to get a little worried. So I reached out. I said, hey, just checking in to see when I should be, placed in my role. And that's when I got the email that said, we're sorry, your job is no longer available. And my heart just sank. Here I was 6 months prior. I had 2 job offers on the table. Now I had none because the other job had already filled that position because 6 months had gone by. And so what I did is I called everybody I knew. And I was like, hey, I'm looking for this. And I kept hearing the same thing. Lauren, you need experience. You need experience, which is the most frustrating thing to hear if you're right out of grad school. I'm like, what do you think I'm trying to do here? So nothing was available. Nobody would take me. They wouldn't even look at me without 3 to 5 years experience. And so I realized I had kind of come up to this wall. And so I was like, well, my student loans are coming up. I need to make money somehow. So I decided to get a job at Starbucks. And I will tell you, this one day I was working the drive-through and it completely changed my life. When you work the drive-through, it is your job to entertain the customer while their drink is being made. So here I am at the window chatting it up with this guy, and he looks up to me and he says, so are you in school? And which was a fair question. Most people were. And I said, no, actually, I just graduated. He's like, great. What'd you get your degree in? And I proudly told, like, it was like the first time anyone had actually taken interest. So I was so excited. I was like, oh, I actually got my degree in performance psychology. And he just starts laughing at me. Like, and not the kind of laughter where like they're laughing with you. Like, it was definitely like laughing at me. And so I was so confused that I actually waited and allowed him to like gather himself. And then I finally asked, I said, what's so funny? And he said, oh, you got one of those degrees you'll never use. And my heart just sank. Like, I felt so many emotions in that moment. Like, I would love to go back to see like what my face actually looked like, because I have no awareness of it. But I literally couldn't hand him his drink. I walked away, so upset, so frustrated. And you know when somebody says something to you and it like ruminates, like you begin to ruminate on it. And so it started playing in my head like a broken record. And every time I heard it, I re-experienced all the emotions all over again. And I got to this point where I was like mad because I was mad. I was like, Lauren, this guy doesn't matter. He doesn't even know you. Like, why are you allowing him so much power over you? And that's when I had my light bulb moment. I realized I wasn't mad because he was rude. I was mad because he was right. You're not going to get very far if you turn around at your first sign of adversity. And here I was, didn't get my jobs that I wanted, and I was sitting and waiting for another one to fall in my lap instead of finding a new way. And so that was the day that I Googled how to start your own consulting company, because I knew if I couldn't go out and get a job with someone else, I had to create a resume worthy of it. And so I started my consulting company. And while I worked like early mornings, I think my shift started at 3:30 in the morning at Starbucks, 3:30 to I think 12:30 in the afternoon. And then after that, I would work my tail off, reaching out to people, cold calling, like offering services for free. And I began to build a resume that supported my desire to work in pro sports, specifically baseball. So I targeted baseball teams specifically so that I could show, like, I've worked with them. I've done this before. And after a year's time, after grinding it out, sending 10 plus emails a day, getting a lot of no's, a lot of no responses, and just building up this resume time and time again, and building my network connections, reaching out to people that sometimes were willing to talk to me and many times were not. And after that time, I had the opportunity to interview with the Yankees and I got the job. And I spent 4 amazing years working throughout their minor league system.
Wow, that's amazing. What a story.
It was wild.
It sounds like it. And you mentioned adversity. You've had your fair share in your life. You mentioned with the jobs, you also lost one of your best friends. How do you overcome these tough moments?
It's such a good question. I'm not sure I could answer it entirely in one podcast, but I'll start with this. I think part of mental resilience, like when you really boil it down, like even just mental performance in general, it is accepting your reality and choosing your response. When I say accepting your reality, what I'm not saying is settling or being okay with what's in front of you. That's not what I'm saying. Because every high performer I work with, they're not okay with average. They're not okay with losing. They don't like those things. But at some point, you have to accept what's in front of you if you are going to move forward. And so I had to accept that my friend was never coming back. I had to accept that those 2 jobs I started out with, I no longer had. I had to accept that guy in the drive-thru pissed me off, not because he was rude, but because he actually struck a chord and he made me look in the mirror. When you are willing to accept your reality, now you got a chance. Now you have the ability to move forward. But failure to accept it will keep you right in the same position you're in. And so I'm not saying there aren't times for grieving. It took me a very long time to grieve my friend. I think to some degree, when I talk about her, I get to heal little pieces of her as I tell her story. So I don't know if that'll ever be over. But I do know that when you choose to look at the choices you're making in response to something difficult, that's really where the beauty lies. Sometimes it takes a while, and that's okay. But when you finally choose to make a choice for you that's forward and productive, really great things can come from it.
Accept it, but not settling. That's really good. I like that a lot. You're taking risks and you're taking chances. We talked about like with the jobs, you started your own consultancy. That wasn't for certain that was going to be successful. And I read somewhere also that when you were younger, you were afraid to fail because you were praised more when you were successful. How has this followed you in your career now as an adult?
Oh, so good. I believe that you can only help others to the degree that you're willing to help yourself. I realized that my inability to take risk, my fear of failing holding me up, my need to be perfect because somehow it gave me a sense of worth, were all reasons I wouldn't be able to help people at a very high level. And so I think I realized if I'm not willing to do the things I'm asking my clients to do, I have no business working with that degree of client. And so I think a piece of me was kind of like, I had the confidence that if I failed epically, I could always rebuild. Like I always knew I could get a job at Starbucks. Like I always knew I could, like I'm not unwilling to do things that are less sexy to get where I need to go. And so I always knew I could always fall back on that if needed. However, I also realized that some of the things we talk about in sports psychology and mental performance is about focusing on the process and the process of success. And so what I realized is like, this is the process, or at least what I believed was the process to achieve success. And I had to be willing to take the risk, not knowing what the outcome was on the other side to achieve it. And so taking those steps were terrifying. But I think once I began to learn my own patterns of behavior and the things that held me back, I was able to overcome them. And so one of the things I discovered about myself is I call it temporary worthiness. I suffered from temporary worthiness, I should say, where if I was successful, I was on top of the world. Like I was on cloud nine. I had all the confidence in the world. I felt really good about myself. And the second I failed or fell short, even in the short term, my worthiness was gone. It's partially why I was so hardworking in soccer, because when I was on the field, I wasn't just playing to win. I was playing to maintain some sense of worth. So when I learned to separate those two things, I started to learn how to perform at a high level. Because I do think that a lot of high performers, sports or otherwise, they can relate to that, where they attach their worth to their outcomes, so they attach their identity to their outcomes. And that is something I had to learn about myself in order to continue to not only level up myself and evolve, but to be able to help others do the same.
Mm. You have spoken about refocus. Is that similar to this, to be able to refocus, to go back to your goals?
I think I like to call it like an anchor, right? It's like, what is your anchor? And the way I describe an anchor is like an anchor in a ship, right? A ship without an anchor is at risk for moving when the wind blows. Where a ship with an anchor, it's going to move, but it's not going to move very far. And so an anchor can be a goal that you set. An anchor can be something that anchors you to the present, whether it's like deep breathing exercises or a phrase or a mantra. It could also be an actual like fixated thing that you're looking at that can help you with your focus. And I know for me that whenever I was going through these risks and these things that I wanted to do that, was also terrified of doing, I had to create an anchor for myself. And a lot of times that came in the form of like my why. Like, what is the reason behind me doing this? Like, my why had to be greater than the fear I was feeling.
Mm.
Reason behind doing what I was doing had to be stronger than the resistance I felt from being uncomfortable or unconfident or worried that I might fail. So I think that when you're talking about refocusing, especially in these instances, I find that understanding those things about yourself, like your why and those things that you can anchor you back to the reason why you're there in the first place, are really helpful when you're coming up against that adversity.
Interesting. So you work with a lot of elite performers. We have said that. What are some traits that you see among elite performers?
Great question. Number one, they don't feel sorry for themselves. I think that high performers are willing to look in the mirror readily and more quickly than the average. I oftentimes will say that one of the big differences between high performers and average performers are it's not that they don't have highs and lows, it's that the space between them is smaller. So they're able to bounce back from successes and losses much quicker than the average performer. I would also say that they're willing to do the boring things over and over and over again. High performance is not always as sexy as people think it to be. I think that it's easy to look at the outcome and go, that is amazing. I want that. But then when you look at the actual day-to-day life that is required to achieve it, most people won't sign up for it. And so I often say, before you sign up for your goals, you need to make sure you are willing to live the lifestyle required to achieve it. Because there is a lot behind the scenes that people don't see. And then I would say the last one is that they're lifelong students. They're always looking to improve themselves. Like it's a never ending cycle, even post sports, even post business career. There's always this cycle of improvement. It's just this never ending. Now, there can be a dark side to that, or a shadow side, I like to say, which is that, they're constantly seeking. And so they never take time to really enjoy. Well, I think that high performers are good at both. They're good at not only going, okay, what can I improve? How can I continue learning? But they're also really good at being like their biggest fan and going like, hey, like that's amazing, and celebrating those wins and taking those times. Because I wouldn't say the balance is 50-50, but there is a balance to it, right? There is a formula for each person. And some of it's, 40-60, some's 80-20, whatever that is. Each person's different, but they do take time to not only celebrate their wins, but to also look in the mirror and go, okay, what's next? Like, how can I continue learning and pushing myself?
No, that's really interesting. And I feel like delayed gratification, specifically for the second point there, but that's something that at least I see in these high performers, that they are able to do the boring now for a reward later.
Oh yeah. That's such a good point.
You also said on this topic, you become a champion in the lead up and not on the actual day. And I feel like that's similar to what we said now, that it's all the hard work before and the delayed gratification.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, like, you work your tail off so that when that moment comes, you're ready to meet it. But without that time before it, you don't just get to show up and be a champion. No, that comes in the everyday. That comes in those seemingly insignificant moments that do add up over time. It's like, I think James Clear, he talked about this example in his book. He said, if a plane takes off in LA and its goal is to land in New York City, if you adjust the nose of the plane just 3 degrees south, at the very beginning, it just looks like a couple feet. But when you multiply that across the United States, you end up in Washington, D.C. in a totally different spot. And so I think that when you multiply the right decisions in the right direction, over time, it adds up to really, really big outcomes.
Yeah. Be brave enough to suck at something new. What do you mean by that?
That one's probably that like just hits home for me. I will tell you that I think like anybody else, I do tend to care what people think, especially when you're doing something new. I think that there's two things to know when you're doing anything new. Number one is that you're probably not going to be great at it at the first time. Like when you first begin something brand new, you're not going to be great at it. And number two, it's going to take repetition to get better. And so I specifically, the video I associated with that quote on my website is actually me messing up a ton when I started doing my midweek mindsets. And I still mess up a ton. Still, just my mess ups look totally different. But I like it's really hard. Like when I first started, I remember my friend, she's a amazing reporter for like the World Surf League. She's awesome. She's great behind camera. She's giving me tips. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just so bad. And she's like, yeah, but you just got to keep doing it, keep doing it. And so I think that you can't have the experience of 1,000 reps without putting in your first. Like, your first article will be wordy. Your 1,000th article will be refined. Your first run will be difficult. Your 1,000th run you'll feel strong. Your first time you're lifting weights, you're going to feel weak. You're going to be lifting these tiny weights and maybe feel a little discouraged. But your 1,000th time at the gym, you are going to be further along than you can even imagine. And so I just find that sometimes it requires us to be brave at the beginning and to be willing to not be great at something, because you cannot become great without first being mediocre at it. And so I think that I love that phrase because, and I didn't come up with it. I've heard it from somewhere else, but I love that phrase because I think that it does take bravery to start something new, which ironically enough means that you're probably not going to be very good at it.
Yeah. You mentioned before about you care what other people think, and also about trying something new. I think that goes for most people. Like if you sing karaoke, if you do it in your house alone, you don't care. But you care if you're in the karaoke bar because there are other people that might judge you. So it's actually like the judgment that people are afraid of, I assume.
Yeah, like the social consequence. And now, most of the time now, it's social consequence. I mean, it's just consequences in general, And I will say that it took me a long time to get past caring what people thought on social media. Now, it doesn't mean that still doesn't pop up. I'm still human. Okay, I still at times I do care what people think. So I'm being very honest in saying that. However, my degree of the weight I give it is totally different nowadays. And I think it's because I've exercised it so much. Like you go look at, I haven't deleted any of my midweek mindsets from the very beginning. So if you want to see me struggle, go there, because that'll show you like how long it really took me to get where I am now. And I still think I have so much room to grow, but I think that, your best eventually improves over time as you continue to give it. And at that time, that was the best I had. That was the best I had. And over time, it just evolved and I got so much better. But yeah, you can go back there, trust me, and it'll make you feel better. But I will say that it did require me to put in the reps to be able to not put so much weight around, what people thought of me, especially when it came to social media.
No, I love that. And I mean, you can go to any creator, Joe Rogan, if you go to his first episodes, they're, not even close to what is going now. And whatever you want to, look at, that's why, putting in the reps and it will be better. And that's what we talked about before, elite performers as well, that your best 10 years ago is not the best as it was 5 years ago, and it's not the same as it is now. So it's all the time you need to improve.
That's right. And I think one of the biggest mistakes I see young or inexperienced athletes make is they quit too soon. They quit before the magic can happen. And like that magic comes in the form of lots of repetitions. But there's a lot of people that aren't willing to put in the reps that's required. Again, that goes back to our number 2, right? That you have to be required to live that lifestyle to achieve it.
So how do you speak to your clients about rejection and handling rejection?
Well, I think that it's, again, for every client, it's different because there's different root systems. So, for instance, I like to just talk about like that the problem is rarely the problem. The problem is often our relationship to the problem. So, a lot of people come to me and go, my problem is failure. Well, hold on. There might be something in there, but your problem is likely your relationship with failure, just like mine was growing up. Like that's where the root came from. Oh, my problem is I'm struggling to make sales. Okay, that's probably not the root though. That's probably how it's being, um, what's the word I'm looking for? That's probably the symptom we're seeing, but that's not the root of the problem. So oftentimes we have to kind of pull up the roots to be able to understand, okay, why is rejection the thing that's really getting in the way? Or why is what so and so said carrying so much weight in my mind? Or why am I struggling to give myself and feed myself the words that I need when I need them? And so oftentimes we will go and we'll look at okay, here's what we're seeing, right? That's the weed. And then what does the root system look like? And so once we can understand the root system, then we can really dive into, what's actually going on here. But I would say that it looks slightly different for everyone.
I don't know if you are aware of David Meltzer. Yeah. So he said sometimes, like, if you think about rejection, like getting a no, if you as something bad and you're feeling bad about it, they told me no. But instead, if you think that every no brings you closer to a yes, then you would be like, it would be positive to get a no, because that means that you're one step closer to the yes. So I really like that, how you turn that around into something positive.
Yeah, like that reframing is so powerful. One story I really, really love is actually I was watching Shark Tank, and I was watching Shark Tank, and Rob Herjavec was. They were all sitting on all the sharks were sitting there, and there was a gentleman pitching his coffee company, and one by one, all of the sharks said no, and Robert Herjavec said no, but he stopped and he said, "Do you know the significance of the number 242?" And he was like, "No, I don't." And he tells the story of Starbucks. And he said that they went around and they got 242 no's from investors before they finally got a yes on the 243rd time. And so he said, "You may have gotten 5 no's here today," but he said, "You are just at the beginning of your journey." Most people are unwilling to hear no 242 times. Keep going. So to your point, I totally agree. I think every no is closer to a yes. And I think that a lot of times rejection becomes like it teaches us the thing that we need or the skill that we need to actually get ourselves to that next level. So yeah, I think rejection is actually it's a gift, but it's often gift wrapped in frustration and upset and maybe a little bit of defeat at times.
Yeah. The power of thinking opposite. Then you gave the Fosbury flop as an example, the high jump that everyone was jumping like face first, and then he went back first, and now he has changed the game completely.
Yeah. I think that there's so much power in thinking opposite. I used to struggle at this at the very beginning of my career. I was kind of like, it's black and white. This is right. This is not. This is what the science says. This is not. And as I began to have experience in the field, I started to actually learn that there's so much power in opposite thinking, not just in the work that I do, but even just for clients and for athletes and for just individuals, because I think it gives you a greater view than one single view does. So now it's like a camera angle. You have multiple angles versus just that one head-on shot. And it gives you more information into what we're actually looking at. And so I love the example of Dick Fosbury with the Fosbury flop. I mean, he completely revolutionized high jump. And I never even knew that the other technique was a thing before researching this, because I only know the Fosbury flop. That's what I did in junior high when you all had to do it. And I just think that it shows that there's a power in that. So if you're going to ask yourself, what do you want? Make sure you also ask, what don't you want? If you're going to ask, what should I focus on? Also ask yourself, what should I ignore? If you're going to ask, what did I do well? Also make sure you're asking, what can I do better? because I do think that the power that it provides is a different perspective. And when you can look at both perspectives, it does give you more options and choices depending on, what the outcome is that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's really good. What is psychological safety, and how do you think that affects performance?
I think it's interesting. Psychological safety is your willingness to speak up in a group. So, do you feel safe to share your opinions, your ideas without feeling the fear of getting shut down? And I find that there's some really great research, and of course I'm going to forget the researchers right now, but there's some really great research on this where it talks about some of the 6 key pieces that all really super teams have. And one of them is psychological safety. People on the team are willing to share their thoughts, their ideas, their feedback without fear of being punished or criticized, or without fear that there will be a consequence in return of that. Now, what it doesn't mean is it doesn't mean that because someone shares something, everybody should accept it, but it does allow for that dialogue to occur. And so I think that in teams without psychological safety, we see a lot of secrets being held. We see information, or not necessarily secrets, I should just say information being held. People unwilling to speak up, and it actually lowers creativity and it lowers collaboration. And we know that if you want a team to be successful, it requires collaboration. That's a really big piece of it. So psychological safety is really important, and being able to foster an environment of that in any team, whether you're a business team, a sports team, military, is important to be able to achieve things at a very high level.
That's sometimes not always the case, specifically in pro sports, that you hear about these very tough coaches that they, almost bully the players and they want for them to play better. And as you said, then those are not the teams usually that raise the cup at the end of the year.
Not typically. Now, there's always an outlier to those. So I'm not to say that there hasn't been success from people that have done that. But what I look at is I'm not just looking at success for my clients, I'm looking at sustainability. And those types of teams or our environments are not sustainable for high performance over time. You might see a flash in the pan here or there, but you're not going to see long-term sustainability because people can't sustain in those environments. They can't perform at their highest environments where they have to shrink themselves.
So talking about what you're doing now, you're doing many things. You have your company, as you said, and you're also doing the midweek mindset newsletter. You're doing your short clips and on YouTube and shorts that I'm following. That's really good. You also mentioned before you're writing a book. So I'm very excited to hear more about that. If you would like to share.
Sure. Yeah. We are in hopefully the final stages of this, and I'm so excited. And it's all about adding yourself to the formula of mental performance, because I think that there's a lot of principles that we speak of or that we talk about in the world of high performance. And it's also sometimes difficult to apply them to ourselves because maybe you're like, oh man, well, I'll never be LeBron James, so I can't do that. Or I'm trying to do what Serena Williams did, but man, it's just not working for me. And so the idea of the book is not only to look at these principles that we see in mental performance, but then also adding yourself to the formula so that it becomes unique to you in creating your own formula for mental performance. So that's kind of what the book is. It's a lot of here's the principles and the science, and then here's the application piece. Some of those things are going to apply really well to you, and some of them, they may not. And the idea is that the worst mental skill is the forced one. And so I don't want to just hand over these skills to just go, here, you should do this because this is what the book says. No, we don't live in a scientific study. We don't have control groups in this world when we're living day to day, and nor should what we're doing from the mental performance side look like that. So the piece is, let's take the uniqueness of you and let's apply that to these things. And the things that work really well for you, that's the formula I want you to take with you.
That's amazing. Because there's so much how to improve yourself, how to better yourself. The people throw on you all the time. You should have a cold plunge, or then you should do something hard every day. And then you should eat this, but not eat that. And you shouldn't drink tap water, or you should drink tap water. And I don't know, it's just, It feels like one week you should do something and the next week you shouldn't do it. So so much information. So loving that to put yourself in the formula and what works for every single individual.
Yeah. And my goal is to put the reader in the driver's seat, is that you are the one driving this formula for yourself. And I'm offering some invitations to try some things based on, not only science, but also application that I've seen with high performers. But you get to be the final decision maker in the formula.
Love it. Do you know when it will be published?
Not yet. We don't have the published date yet, but we're at the very end stages. So I will update you as soon as I know.
Well, that's awesome. And I will share it when we know some more information.
Thank you.
And I also know there are some other things that you're working on for the future as well.
Yes. So every year I host an event called Elite by Choice. And this year we are doing it slightly different. So I've hosted 2 events in the past, one for professionals, whether you're in the business world, whether you're a head coach. And then I've hosted another one for people in the field of sport and performance psychology. But for the first time, we are merging the 2. And so the event is going to be for people that want to improve themselves from the mental performance space and leadership development space. So that doesn't mean if you work in mental performance, amazing, you'll get so much out of it. If you are a CEO or an executive or a head coach of a pro team, this is also for you as well. And so I'm really excited. It will be taking place on November 7th through the 9th, and it will be in sunny San Diego. We are so excited. So make sure you head to our website, or my website, I should say, Lauren Johnson and Co. That is all spelled out, ANDCO.com.
Amazing. So I will put your website and your other channels in the show notes below as well, if someone find that easier to just click that. Loving the name also, Elite by Choice, not by chance.
Yeah.
I feel like it ties a good together what we have talked about today as well.
Absolutely. I truly believe it. Like, you become elite by choice, not by chance. It doesn't happen just by sitting where you're at and not being intentional. It requires intentionality and making the choices that are in line with the things that you really want and power of opposite thinking don't want.
There you go. I usually ask the guests if they have some good advice for young people who wants to pursue a career in sports. So maybe now for someone who wants to take a similar or do something that you're working with, if you have some advice for them.
Yeah, great question. I actually give this piece of advice whenever I speak to a grad student, and this doesn't just have to apply to grad students. This can also be students that are in, their undergrad as well. But is to get on the phone with anyone that'll take your call that is currently in the field. Now, having said that, there are a lot of people that are really busy. And I remember there were times I couldn't take or still can't take phone calls. So that's not to say that don't get discouraged if you don't get a response or they say no. Keep asking. And when you get the opportunity, when you get that yes, even if you get some no's at the beginning, make sure you take notes on the call and do your best to not just learn from them, like what kind of information you want to learn, but also learn about them. What are they interested in? What are the things that they loved? Like, what are their passions? What are the things like that they were really like passionate about, even outside of sport? Maybe it has to do with their family, whatever that is. And then after your call, set a reminder 3 to 4 months out and reconnect with them, reach out to them, let them know where you're at, like anything that you've applied that they actually suggested. And then mention something that they talked about that was personal to them. Maybe it has nothing to do with mental performance. I'll give you an example of this. I did this with an amazing woman who got on a call with me, and her daughter was about to have a birthday, and all the invitations got lost in the mail. When she ordered it from the company, she never got them. And so she was freaking out about it. And so we had this whole conversation. In 3 months' time, I reached out to her and I asked, how did that go? Oh my gosh, I remember the invitations. How was her birthday? Was it this, all that? And then I sent it off to her. Well, every 3 to 6 months after that, I would always follow up with something like that. First of all, she was shocked I even remembered. Number 2, what you're doing is you're actually developing a relationship with that person. A lot of times, just because you get on a conversation and you get your questions answered doesn't mean you have a relationship. That's an informational interview, if you ask me. If you want to develop relationships with people, actually care about who's on the other end and follow up with them. That is quite literally the way I got the New York Yankees job, is because I developed these relationships with people in the field. And when the Yankees job came about, they did not post it publicly. They only sent it to people in our field. And I received it from like 3 to 4 people, sent me the job offer because they thought of me. So a couple things will happen when you do this. Number one, you're going to build relationships. Number two, you're going to stay top of mind. So if and when an opportunity does present itself, number one, they already trust you because you followed up, you've developed a relationship. And number two, you're always on their mind. And so for me, that is the best piece of advice I can give, because school, all the other stuff, you can learn that stuff. Networking and developing relationships with others is very, very important. I will also say, don't take it personally if you get a no. I've had some people call me and they're really upset because somebody that I know wouldn't answer their call. And I'm like, you have no idea what they're going through. So do your best to extend grace and also like keep going even if you get no's.
I love that. I've asked this question in 100 plus interviews, and I think that was probably the best advice I've heard so far. I feel like we have been through this, but I will ask you it anyway one more time. Has there been any bumps on the road in your career, and how did you overcome them?
So many. Like, how long do you have, Marcus? A lot. Let me think of something that I haven't told you. I will say, I'll tell you this one. This one actually this was an earlier one for me. One of the things I learned was you can give honest advice to the degree that you have a relationship with the person on the other end receiving it. I learned this the hard way, meaning you have to build a relationship strong enough to bear the weight of truth. I gave some really harsh feedback to a young athlete, professional athlete, early on before really knowing him. And I spent the next 3 years rebuilding it, or at least doing my best to rebuild it. But I learned a very valuable lesson. Sometimes you don't need to be the messenger. And sometimes the message isn't ready to be received. And so the question I often ask myself is, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? Sometimes you can be right and be very ineffective. And so that was a hard lesson for me to learn really early on, but it really taught me a valuable lesson, is to, just because you have an answer or just because you might be right, it may not be the time, the place, or you may not be the person to give that piece of feedback. So something to consider whenever you are giving feedback, especially if it's a harsh, honest truth.
But that must be tough to weigh that in your position. If you see something that needs adjusting, but it's too early, how do you handle that? Do you ask questions in a manner that you try for them to get there themselves?
That's one way to do it for sure. And I'd say getting as curious as you possibly can. But I think honesty without considering how it will be received on the other end is selfish. So just because you have feedback doesn't mean that it is the right time to give it. And so I think that it requires understanding and knowing the person. And also, are they asking for it? Because sometimes in the teams I work with, they aren't asking me, but I am observing it. And so it's different, right? When you're working with a one-on-one client and they're coming to you, they're going, hey, I want to get better. I want to see this. It's another thing when you're hired on as staff, because not everybody wants your feedback, even if you have observed something very interesting or something that could actually potentially make them better. So sometimes I should say that a couple things I've noticed is, number one, like you said, you can get really curious and ask questions. Number two is to ask around how things are typically received. And another one is to also use people that have that relationship. So let's say, like, for instance, I remember there was a player at the Yankees. He was younger, didn't have a very close relationship with him. I knew he really looked up to this player at a different level. And so I asked that player, like, hey, are you seeing this? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? And he's like, oh, yeah, I see it. I'm like, would you be comfortable sharing that with him? I know he really values your opinion. It's like, yeah, absolutely. Suddenly that player wraps his arm around him and he's listening. So I think that there's different ways to do it, but I also think that that's part of just interpersonal skills of sometimes you're going to get it right, sometimes you're going to get it wrong, but I think within those situations learning like when is the right time, when is not, is kind of there. It's a little bit of an art that you start to learn with experience.
You care a lot. I can see that in when you're talking, and I've also heard other interviews. So where do you think this passion comes from and wanting the best from them?
I think because I saw the fragility of life at a very young age. When my best friend took her own life, before she passed away, the things I cared about most was how I looked at school, how well I played on the soccer field, and, what boys I liked that week. Like, that was really all I cared about. If I could really sum it up, right? And mind you, I'm a freshman in high school, so I'm like 14 at this time, 14 or 15. And then suddenly, when my friend passed away, I saw like the value of life, and it was put right in front of me, and I'm not sure I was ready for it, to be honest with you. I fell into a deep depressive state myself. I actually became suicidal myself, and it took a lot of work to get out of it. But I know, kind of referencing one of the things we talked about earlier, is sometimes those darkest moments are the best environment for a seed to actually become rooted and to grow. And so I couldn't have told you anything about, I couldn't have seen that in it, but it was once I got through it that I went, I see the value this brought me. And so I think because I have been in that fragile state myself, and I've seen my best friend lose her life as a result of it, I just deeply care about other people because I find that sometimes our best asset and our best tool is our support system, is other people. It's people around us. And so I think I get so much fulfillment helping people see their own value and helping them see and realize their own potential. Like, there's nothing cooler than watching a client just perform at their best. And not best as in like whatever, but how everyone else defines it, but best in how they define it for themselves. It's like, I actually showed up and I continued to do the thing, even though I was fearful. Like, that to me, there's nothing cooler than that. Like, I was able to land that deal because I reminded myself over and over again that I'm worthy of landing it and I'm worthy of doing this. And I showed up with energy and I knew my stuff and I was so confident, and they signed on the spot. Like, hell yeah. There is nothing that feels better than that. So I think that we never know what life is going to hand us. And I know it's a cliche thing to say, but it's so true. We don't know how long our lives are going to last. I saw that with my friend, and she taught me that a life well lived is one that is 100% authentic to us. And why in the hell would we allow our own thoughts and feelings of others to get in the way of that? Now, I fight that battle every day myself too, because I am human, but I think I get out of bed because I'm ready to fight that battle with my clients every day, because there's nothing cooler than watching them perform and see their own value in their own life.
Amazing. In my opinion, having this experience, you have lived through it and learned and care. I mean, the value you can bring to your clients from your life experience could be life changing.
Yeah. Well, and I just think that it could be, that's for sure. I also think that, I mean, my clients change me too. It's a two-way street. My clients inspire me every day in what they're able to overcome and achieve and accomplish and what they're able to reveal in themselves. Like that is inspiring to me every day. I really think that I help people get out of their own way by virtue of holding up a mirror, but I can't give people advice and they will change. They have to do the work. It's kind of like I can tell a baseball player or an executive, these are the things that I would suggest, but if they don't go execute it, if they don't go do those things for themselves, none of that matters. And so it's life-changing by virtue of them going and showing up for themselves and doing the work. And that to me, man, it's so cool to see.
Beautiful. Finally, if the listeners wants to reach out to you, how do they do that best?
Best way is to go to my website. You can also reach out to me on like Instagram and Twitter and those kind of places as well. When I got married and I changed my last name to Johnson, there's a lot of Lauren Johnsons in the world. So I'm just going to throw that out there. So all of my social media handles are different. But my website has all of them on there. So you can go to my one place and you can either reach out to me on my website, find ways to work with me, or you can reach out on Instagram and Twitter and all of those places.
Fantastic. Lauren Johnson, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Marcus. And thank you for just the thoughtful research you did and the thoughtful questions. Like that was such a fun interview.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.